And by now, you probably can also guess why I would not have opted for the administrative services, the IAS or IPS. Those kind of people will probably not be happy in civil. So one of the things which, again, I have not mentioned, the president is pleased to appoint you, sort of thing. And the day that letter came, I told my mom, and she just laughed.
Hi, Shantanu. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to the season 1 of the Business and Policy podcast. And I mean this, but I'm truly delighted.
I'm very happy to be here, Naman. Thank you. Looking forward to this.
And I think we had a small conversation a month ago. Your journey has been truly delightful. You have joined the foreign services, worked in the foreign services for a few years, and then launched a grassroots level movement called Satyameva Jayate in India. Thereafter, you went on to study at the London Business School, and now you are helping startups across the world, not just in India, to scale the work and the impact that they have to create.
Yeah,
I think your journey is inspirational, not because you have achieved all these things, but also because of the decisions that you have made. Because I'm sure many of these decisions would have been very hard. So look forward to covering various facets of your decision-making models and the advice that you might have for youngsters who will be watching this podcast with you. So off to you, Shantanu. Whatever I have spoken right now is based on a secondary research and the first-hand conversation with you, but audience would love to learn more about you and your story.
Sure. So I've done, as you said, Naman, a lot of interesting things, and it has been a very unusual journey if you look at it from a traditional point of view. So I started off traditionally with a degree in engineering, which people of my age know was one of the two things that you do if you turn out to be a good boy. So you either study to be an engineer or you become a doctor, and then a few of us would then try other things too. But so I studied engineering, which but that I realized even as I was halfway through my degree that I did not particularly enjoy that. And again, I don't think that's uncommon. Even today, I wonder how many students who actually study technology engineering actually enjoy it, because a lot of them, as you know, and you probably have a few of your friends themselves who will study for a professional degree, but then end up doing something quite different, which actually, by the way, is not a bad thing at all. But then I think that goes back to the heart of your question about decision making, right? So was that a thought through decision at all in the first place? And in my case, it was not. The engineering was kind of a default option at that time. So we are talking of the 80s here, okay, early 80s, mid 80s. And as I said, there were very limited choices. I grew up in a city called Indore in Madhya Pradesh, which is a big city and is now even bigger, but it's not a cosmopolis. So there were few avenues to explore, and there were few people around who could share with you what else you could be doing. But also, India at the time was very different. We are talking of 80s when liberalization had not yet begun, and there's still, in terms of jobs, etc., the opportunities were very few and far between. And this was before the mobile and the telecom and the television revolution. All this was pre that. So that was a decision that most people stumbled into it. I stumbled into it, and then a lot of people just stay into it or move out. I decided to move out. So that's how it started. And the civil services was actually, again, another decision that wasn't entirely thought through right from an early age, for example. So I think you probably know people, and there are many aspirants for civil services who have their minds set on it, at least a few years before appearing for the exam. So this is something that they want to be, and it is one of their dreams and aspirations, which is a very noble thing, by the way. In my case, it wasn't so. Most people in college would decide and determine that they want to be in the civil service, and then they'll start preparing for it. Right? I was doing something completely different in college, and that was of civil service was not on my mind at all, not in the least. By the way, no one in my family or extended family is in government service either. So it wasn't something that I'd experienced close hand. Although I had some few closest friends, their fathers were very senior officials in government, but that was my only exposure. So that decision was actually a rebound from something which is a story which most people would not know and find it very hard to believe, but it is true. And that was a rebound decision, and the rebound was from the rejection I had from IIM Ahmedabad. Okay, now you must be wondering where we are heading here, okay? Because you started off asking me about civil service, and we still haven't reached that, and we're not talking of IIM Ahmedabad. So I told you just a minute back, and I will try and keep it brief because otherwise you can get stories within stories, okay? And you end up somewhere quite different where you want to. But I told you just a few minutes back that engineering was not something I enjoyed while I was studying it. So I actually studied computer engineering, which if you think about it, in the 80s, I was extremely fortunate to actually have been able to work on a computer and see a PC kind of firsthand. But my heart was not in it. And it was something I understood. But, there are things you understand, but you don't enjoy doing. And this was one of those things. And so for me, the option for most people at that time in the 80s who were not in IIT but were studying engineering in a decent college was to do a MS in US. Okay, we now have an entire huge group of professionals in US who are my age, who all were studied engineering at college, and not necessarily computer engineering, electronics engineering, mechanical, whatever, and went to do a MS. That was not an option for me, obviously. I did not enjoy technology. Okay, so doing a master's would have been kind of shooting myself in the foot, a bit of a masochistic thing to do. So that was not an option. Why would I do that? And so the only other thing that I thought I could do and still, have a decent job or make a good living, let's do an MBA, right? Mm-hmm. This was also very typical. Wouldn't surprise anyone from my generation if I said that, and even today. And so that's how I decided to get out of engineering. So I should do an MBA. So I prepared for CAT and got into IIMs, all the three IIMs, which was very fortunate to be able to do that. But then something extraordinary happened, which seems a bit hard to believe these days, but it did happen, and hopefully it doesn't happen anymore. You probably know, Naman, and your listeners would know that you can appear for CAT while still in your final year. Yeah. But you have to clear your exam before you get admitted. Yeah. You have to clear your final exam, undergrad degree, okay? Mm-hmm. So I appeared for CAT in my final year exam of my BE degree. And to cut a long story short, the exam had not happened by the time IIM asked me to join the course. Mm-hmm. So I went up to Ahmedabad, met the dean and said, so this is the problem. I haven't yet appeared for my exam, but I have an offer of admission. Can I come and go back to give my exams? And then if I assure you I will pass, but if I don't, you can throw me out. Yeah. And they said, no, we can't take you in because the requirement of a postgraduate program, which is what IIM is. It's a postgraduate program, right? You know that. Yeah. It's a postgraduate diploma in management. In fact, IIM doesn't give you an MBA. And again, your listeners would know this. So it is a postgraduate program. So obviously, if you aren't a graduate, we can't take you in. Okay, I mean, he said it in a nice way, but it was still quite heartbreaking for me. So that was the rebound, and people do different things on a rebound, right? You heard of relationship rebounds and so on. This was my rebound. I said, all right, so I can't go into engineering because my heart is in it, not in it. And I was so upset with that decision that I decided I'm not going to do an MBA from IIMs ever. And so that option is still, and I didn't want to do an MBA from anywhere else. So where do you end up? And that's how you end up thinking civil services. Mm-hmm. And of course, what else is left? And you can't do medicine at that age. It's too late. Mm-hmm. And besides, I would faint at the sight of blood. So Yeah, so that's a kind of long-winded response to your question about how I ended up. Now you can see I think there was quite thought-through decision when appearing for MBA. Was a thought-through decision. Okay, I thought, okay, if you don't want engineering, this is what you need to do. This is how you need to prepare, etc., etc., etc. And that led to that offer of admission. But then it didn't happen. So in spite of your best decision making, life can take its own course sometimes.
So, an hour ago, before starting this podcast, I posted a community post on YouTube introducing your story to all the viewers and all the subscribers. And I requested them, what kind of questions would you want to ask to Shantanu?
Okay.
And believe me, there's a flurry of questions now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
around why foreign services, why did you resign from foreign services?
Yes.
Please give an honest answer.
I will give an honest.
They have all been asking this question.
All right.
So the question is, what made you join the foreign services of all the services? And
what made you resign
from services?
Yeah, that's it's actually a very good question and a very natural question. I mean, surely, people say, why did you join? Because it's in the 80s and 90s, and even today, I do not believe it is any longer the first choice for most aspirants. Okay, it is now. So in Nehru's time and in the 60s and 70s, the top rank holders would opt for foreign service. Okay, by the time I appeared for civil services, that was easily still among the top. It would go within the top 100. I mean, you're not going to get foreign service at that time. I don't know how it is today, but certainly in my time, there were a handful of open positions. In my case, there were 12, if I remember correctly. So just 12 positions all over India in the foreign service. And obviously, they would go within the top 100, easily. So while it was not the number one, there were very few people. In fact, in my own batch, I'm probably one of the only 3 who actually opted for foreign service as the first choice. Even though we could, the 3 of us, we could have got IAS easily. My rank was 31st AIR, so it was not a problem to join the civil services. But it was funny actually. If you ask me why foreign service as the first choice, well, you and your listeners will be shocked to hear what my second and third choices were, and that kind of turns decision making on its head. Actually, not, and I will show you how. But the second choice was the Indian Information Service. Okay. Now, why would you opt for the information service after foreign service? Because if your rank is a bit lower, you can do central exercise, you can do police, you can do, number of things. Why information? So I'll come to that in a minute. And then the third choice was even more bizarre, which actually you probably know, but I don't know how many of your listeners know. There is a service called the Indian Andamans and Nicobar Civil Service, or a part of the civil service.
Okay? and TANIPs,
yeah. It's part of it. It used to be a separate thing at that time, and that was my third choice. And specifically Andaman Nicobar. Okay, now it's, I think, the Union Territory cadre or something. So that Goa, etc., used to be part of that. But the Andaman Nicobar was a specific choice. And
now you have to explain all these bizarre decisions.
Yeah, and you and your listeners will be wondering, this guy is nuts, right? And I think my parent often thought that is this even real? Are you serious? And I was, and my logic was very, very simple, but it was quite bold, but it was simple. And the logic was, if I get a good rank, I will join the foreign service, and I'll come to that why that was number one. Now, if I do not, I have a love of writing, and I had that love of writing since I was young. And the stupid, naive me, 20-some years old, thought that information broadcasting, Indian Information Service has to do a lot with writing, which of course, now I know better. But so this would be an opportunity for me to pursue that passion. And then the third thing I thought was, okay, if I just barely manage to scrape through and get, at least get something, then I will be posted in Andaman Nicobar, where I hope to write a novel, because there will be nothing to do. Okay, so that was the logic. I said, let's see what comes out of that. And if I don't get into anything, then we'll see what. That was a different plan altogether behind that. Okay. Now, the foreign service, the first choice was very, very simple. I have a love of traveling. I still enjoy traveling hugely. I have a great curiosity for foreign countries and languages and cultures. And this to me was the best opportunity to actually firsthand experience some of that. And by now, you probably can also guess why I would not have opted for the administrative services, the IAS or IPS, because someone with a mind like mine is probably not going to be a good fit. Okay, it's going to cause too much trouble and create all kind of issues for myself, but for others.
Why do you say so?
Well, you don't want people who think this odd way in the services, right? You ideally want people who are rational, sensible, kind of broadly follow the line. You don't want people who, if you ask them to stand in a line, will then say, why? And so that is a problem in bureaucracy. Okay, you are not supposed to ask why. I mean, it's a bureaucracy, look, for God's sake. What do you expect? It's not a startup. So I knew that I would not fit. And the service, I mean, even today is very heavily politicized, the IAS in particular. Even then was, and even today it is. And I mean, we can talk about bureaucracy, but really things have changed in the last 20 years, but merit was not really the criteria for doing well in bureaucracy at that time. Okay, there were a number of other things that came into play, and there was a lot of politics, and I just could not stomach that. I knew I could not stomach that. So that was not a choice for me at all. It was, I mean, very clear that I would not join the IS. I would rather join the information or Andaman than join IFS, IS, IPS or anything. So that was it. And that was the way it ended up. And that's how I got in the foreign service. So I was, as I said, very, very lucky to, in spite of this crazy way of thinking, ending up where I did. So hopefully that answers.
Because I think you just mentioned that IS is heavily politicized. And yes. Especially with these services, given these are part of bureaucracy, you have to toe the line.
Yes.
Isn't that the case with the foreign services as well?
Yes, it is. It is, absolutely. And to some extent, far less. And the reason is very simple. And certainly, so let me step back. These days, that reason probably is less valid, the reason that I'm going to mention. But certainly in the 90s, so I joined in 1991. Mm-hmm. Okay, so back in the 70s and 80s, foreign policy and things happening abroad were of such distant concern to politicians that they would usually not interfere.
91 is such a historic year to keep up these services.
Indeed. So my logic was they would let us be, okay? You wouldn't have to deal too much with politicians, which is true. Right? I mean, you have friends in civil services. Ask someone from IS how many times does he speak to or meet to or interact with a politician. Ask someone from the foreign service, and the vast difference. I mean, these days, of course, things have changed. So a lot of politicians visit abroad and try and attract investments. But 80s, etc., the only time you visited abroad was for treatment, medical treatment, that a politician would visit abroad, okay? Unless they are the prime minister or someone else, and that's different. So these days things have changed. But that day I thought, okay, if you're abroad and you're in an embassy, no one is going to hassle you. You are just working with your colleagues, and that's fine. I would enjoy that, and I don't mind that at all. But what I did not want is to be interacting with politicians and others and getting into trouble. There are many stories, and I had heard them, and you heard them, I'm sure. But so it was, to me, that was the obvious kind of rational choice to make.
Now the question about why did you resign from such?
Yeah.
such a service?
So. I give you an honest answer.
And how was the experience in the services? I mean, I'm sure you worked for quite some time.
I did. I worked for 7 years. I did a full posting in Tokyo. So look, I have been very fortunate. I keep saying to everyone, with everything in life, and the same happens with we're talking about foreign service. So I opted for Japan as a language to study. You probably know, and your listeners would know, that everyone in the foreign service needs to study and pass an exam for a language before they can be confirmed in the service. So this was like kind of my big nervous moment, that I didn't want to flunk Japanese, and I had chosen a difficult language. It is not a phonetic language, as you know. So, but luckily I passed, and I was posted there, and had the very good fortune of working with some very, very good senior officers, including our present foreign minister, who was my boss for a while in Tokyo. And that experience was extraordinary. That 3-4 years that I was posted in Japan, it was a massive learning experience. I learned a lot, and I wish that I enjoyed that. I wanted it to continue, of course, but for reasons which were not in my control, but also my naivety, I would say, and ignorance and stubbornness. I think there's a combination of this. Okay. So there's a combination of ignorance, there's a combination of naivety and stubbornness, and et cetera, et cetera. And by now, your listeners probably have a good picture of my personality traits here. So my friends know this, and your listeners, of course, would not know this, but my family know this too. I told my mother the day I got my selection letter from so the appointment letter actually for civil services comes from the president, which is an extraordinary thing. I mean, obviously, it is cycle styles, not personally, but it's the president is pleased to appoint you sort of thing. And the day that letter came, I told my mom, I'm going to leave in 10 years. And she said, why do you say that? It's such a good day today. You got your appointment letter, you've been selected, and you're saying you're going to leave in 10 years? And I said, well, you know me, mom, I won't be able to survive. I think I'm too difficult. And she just laughed. And she knew, by now, that I kind of think very differently. So, but anyway, I was enjoying my times coming back to Tokyo. So as I said, I ended up after Tokyo, I was looking for another posting, but actually ended up in New Delhi, in South Block. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I ended up in the MEA headquarters, and there something happened which, no one is to be blamed, but let me just put it simply and without revealing too much, is I ended up being the wrong person in the wrong place. Okay, and this was not just me, by the way. There is another colleague who I will not name, who also ended up for no fault of his own, neither of us for any fault of her. But, sometimes just unlucky, right? Mm-hmm. And so we ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. And that experience for him and for me was really, really disheartening, demotivating, demoralizing. And it was quite bad. He kind of took it and he suffered, poor chap. I stood around, but I decided that I have had enough. And there was one incident in particular which I don't wish to get into, but the root of that incident is this hierarchy, which the core of bureaucracy is hierarchy, right? Mm-hmm. And hierarchy means people above you can expect things of you that you would not normally expect of people below you. Mm-hmm. Even things like, the senior officers might, for example, expect you to carry their bags, as an example. Okay.
Even for an officer, is that the case?
Ask the junior officer. Not the senior officer might ask the junior officer, right? Wow. Expect. I would say not ask. Sorry. So I'm choosing words carefully. They might expect. Now you may not, and a lot of things I'm saying, Naman, probably may not resonate with your listeners because they are young. India has changed. Mm-hmm. A lot has changed, but if you have parents or relatives who are in their 50s, they would understand what I'm trying to say. So the hierarchy and the absolute power that hierarchy wields, and that can make people do things which they wouldn't do normally, or they wouldn't even occur to them that this is not something that they should be doing or asking someone to do. So there was one particular incident which just triggered me, and to me, I said, that's it. I can't continue. And so after that point, it was just a matter of deciding what next. And so coming back to your decision model, and this has already become a very long-winded response to your question, but coming back to your decision models, there were now only two things left, right, at this point, because you can't go back into technology. Already world has moved ahead. I don't want to in any case. And I had myself decided stupidly that I'm not going to do any MBA from IIMs. So that route is closed, which I could have. Right? People do MBA after a few years in service, and that's not uncommon or not something strange. Or you could do something else. And I thought, okay, so I have even today a very strong interest in economics, great curiosity about economics. And I thought maybe this is a good time to pursue a PhD in economics.
And this interest got lightened up when you were in Tokyo, or?
No, I had that. I think I had that Perhaps when I started preparing for civil services. Yes, that's when it was. Because in college, I hardly read anything about economics. But I think when I was preparing for the civil services, because obviously, for general studies, you have to do a lot of reading, quite a lot of reading. And during that reading, I actually discovered my passion, which was two subjects which I still absolutely, that's kind of shaped my future life, is history and political science, and economics was the other one. And I would have taken history and political science PhD, except I thought that there were no jobs in that. This is the 90s, okay? So I thought, okay, economics, perhaps you can get a better job. And the other thought was, then maybe I'll do an MBA from somewhere outside India. And that's how I ended up at London Business School. So that's the short answer.
So I will definitely talk about your analysis of the decision in the hindsight. But before that, would love to learn and hear from you your thoughts on what happens in civil services, because many of our listeners, they have a very glorified image of being a civil servant.
Yes.
And for all the right reasons or wrong reasons, that's the case.
Yes.
So what's your understanding of civil services as someone who has been part of this story?
Yeah.
And additionally, to just add on to it, I think tomorrow also I'm talking to a friend of mine, Vidya Bhushan. Vidya was a collector in various parts of UP, and he's now based in UK.
Oh, really? Okay.
And he also resigned from services. I think his
really? Did he?
accepted last month.
Okay.
So this is happening a lot these days. Many of the civil servants are resigning from services.
Yes.
So why do you think that's happening? And what's the state of civil services versus your understanding?
So, first of all, let's talk about the glorified image, okay? So what people see are the perks. Okay, they see a retinue of servants, they see big bungalows, they see jeeps and cars, and basically people at your whim doing things that you just want to get done. You get things done. That's what you see. That's the image that people have, that Saab and collector can get anything done, DIG and IGA, and to a great extent that is true. What they do not see and what people do not realize until they come in is all that goes behind, right? Of course, no one is going to tell you about the 10 p.m. call from the minister about something. Okay, they're not going to talk about that. That you will never know or see. They won't tell you about the kind of games that go on behind the scenes regarding postings and transfers. Okay, they won't tell you about the pressure that's brought upon people to do certain things or to not do certain things. So there are those things which I think how do I put it? If your listeners and if anyone who is aspiring for civil services feels that they are different, and people know when they're different, I think you probably knew you were different given your career trajectory. Okay, so you may not tell it to others, but I think in your heart, you are not an average person who will try and get a job and stick to it for 30 years. People know that in their hearts. Those kind of people will probably not be happy in civil. I was going to say won't survive. I think they might survive, but they will be unhappy. And there are a lot of unhappy people in the civil services. And the ones among them who are lucky like me and fortunate and want to take a risk, then they leave, like your friend, like I did. But many others will suffer quietly because of the perks I just told you, because of the fact that you can't get fired, and because of the fact that at the very least it guarantees you a very cushy retirement. So there are all these things which make people stay, but I just told you the things that make people leave. And increasingly, youngsters of today's generation, they are bold. They have seen the country rise. They have seen our progress, and they believe, and rightfully so, that there are perhaps better opportunities for their talent outside, where they can do what they wish without interference, without worrying about what goes on behind their back, and without having to, basically do things or agree to things that they do not want to. So they have choices. I think people have choices today. So you see a lot of resignations, and they were there in my time too. But I think I was the second person to resign from the foreign service ever when I did. The first person resigned because he wanted to marry a foreign national, which at that time was not allowed. And coincidentally, he was actually based in Tokyo as well, was a journalist. And I apparently was the second person. The people did resign after me, Manishankar Ayerji and lots of other people, but they resigned for political way, of course, because you can't be in politics if you are in government servant. So uh, people did not, but nowadays it has changed. I know someone actually who resigned from the foreign service 5 years after me, a junior who is now in World Bank, doing very well. And from the IIS, where do I start? In my own batch, I know at least half a dozen people already in my batch. Now that's 91, okay, who resigned by now have resigned. In fact, the number 3 in our batch, and I think also the number 1. Number 3 for sure, because he's a good friend and he's in Seattle and worked a long time in Microsoft. So he resigned very soon, about 10 years or so into the service. He was a collector of Dhule and then resigned. And then number 1 was Raju Narayan Swamy. I believe he has resigned, but I'm not very sure about that. But at least 5 others have, I know. So there you are.
So I think, of course, one thing that you mentioned is that the overglorified image has a component of perks that people see. But many of the youngsters have an argument that they join public services to provide public services. And yes, perhaps being part of the UPSC civil services is perhaps the best way and means to provide that service to the people of India at a large scale. Is that true? Do they have all the tools and means and ways to make a large mark if they are motivated to make a large mark?
Yes. No, definitely. Look, I think that still holds true, but there is a big caveat here. Okay, there's a very big caveat. So yes, I think you have enough authority, enough resources, enough freedom, autonomy, let's say, and to have impact at scale. Okay, and we have numerous examples. Okay, of you read about this in the newspapers. I mean, Indore, where I come from, is now one of the cleanest cities in India, and I think for the last 6 years, and that was the result of a very bright, young, energetic IS commissioner. Okay, similarly in my time, and we are talking back 20, 30 years ago, one, I think, bright young IS officer in Gujarat started something called the single window clearance, which these days is very common. Basically, for anything, you just go to one window instead of hopping around desks in a collectorate office. So people can make an impact. They have the ability to do so, absolutely. And if you're motivated to do that, you should definitely try. The big caveat is, it's okay as long as whatever you want to do does not interfere with the general scheme of things, okay? And when I say general scheme of things, I mean here politics and local equations, the power equations. As long as you're not upsetting someone influential or someone major or some political person, you are probably okay. Okay, so if it's like cleaning a city, who's going to get upset with that? Probably no one. But try demolishing an illegal settlement, for example, or try shutting down areas of activity that you think are illegal or not being operated under license, or business premises which are engaged in some things which are not quite legal. And if they have political patronage, you run into a problem. Essentially, you will have to back off, or you will get into some serious trouble. And again, there are instances of people getting into serious trouble. IS officers, for example, there's a famous case in my time when I was young of an officer from the Bihar cadre who was for his sins was posted, and in the end ended up as the head of Association of Welfare of Rickshaw Pullers or something like that. Now imagine what an enormous waste of talent and how demotivating. But also I know people who join with the noblest of intentions. I have a very good friend, very, very good dear friend, who joined and in the Central Excise and Customs Service and decided to clean up things a little bit. And got into so much trouble that had to leave, frankly. Could not continue. Serious trouble, we're talking of threats and so on. Similarly in the police as well. So look, it's correct to believe that. And if you're lucky enough, you will be able to do it. Yes, I have no doubt, and I can give you examples. But a lot of them either cannot or find it too hard or, end up in the rut after a while. Because also do not forget, Naman, that scope for doing something reduces as you rise in the ranks. A collector can do a lot of things in a city, okay? But once you are, say, secretary level, there are fewer things you can do because you are now concerned with so many different things and you have to think about a lot of different aspects. So I think that ability to bring about big changes reduces. And if you're still motivated by public service, that's when I encourage people to think about politics, which I've been very involved in that, and that was kind of I had the same mindset, but at least I think I was maybe stupid, or I wouldn't say I was necessarily wise, but I realized that I would not be able to survive in the IS, not because I did not want to do good things, but because I would have forever ended up in trouble because of the things I told you.
Of course, we'll talk about that aspect of your story, the
Sure.
Satyameva Jayate story. But before that, if someone is, let's say, in his or her early 20s and wants to create large-scale impact, wants to work with India, wants to work for India, if not civil services, what are the other ways and means through which that person can perhaps contribute to India's story?
Sure. No, that's a very good question. And I'm glad you asked that, because one thing that I've been involved with for the last 10, 12 years, actually, is an area called impact investing, which you may know about, some of your listeners would know about. But impact investing is essentially what I do, and the work I do with funds which do that is investing in enterprises, social enterprises, we call them. And what are these social enterprises? So here is the theory behind the social enterprise, any social enterprise. And the premise is that there are certain challenges around us in society, in a region, in countries, or in various places, which, for whatever reason, the government struggles to solve. Okay, either because of resources or because of other reasons. Let's not get into that. But say there are challenges which the government struggle to solve. These challenges cannot be solved by individuals. Let's take, as a great example is primary health. Okay, you and me, even if we want to, we can't do anything about primary health. I mean, the most you can do is donate some medicines, right? And even if you're a doctor, there are only so many patients you can treat in a day. You can't really solve primary health problem. Okay, so that's an example. Charities do a lot of work in such areas, where this challenge of education or health or think of any socioeconomic challenge, essentially. Now, the problem with charities is they do not scale. You can't scale a charity. I mean, very few do, and they are very large, but then they have their own issues, etc. But it's not a scalable solution that you can say, okay, this is how it works. And so what impact investments do, or the social enterprises are trying to bridge that. They say, let's address these problems in a commercial way. And commercial meaning not as in, let's take a lot of profit, but let's do it in a sustainable way. There should be enough profit to grow the business and to pay the people who are supporting that initiative. So those things are called social enterprises. And there are lots of these, and there are lots in India too. And that is one thing I would encourage your listeners to think about as an option. Okay. Now, obviously, if you want a lot of money and, kind of a great lifestyle, maybe that's not for you, because it's really hard to see how you can get a good lifestyle trying to solve serious challenges here. But that is one way. That is just one. The second is, of course, we talked about civil services. And so, by all means, I'm not going to discourage any of your listeners from saying, do not even bother. That would be wrong, and actually the wrong conclusion to draw from my example. After all, don't forget, my example is just one of the hundreds that every year appear for civil, and get into it. And if you talk to 99 people, they will all say, we are very happy. So, I would say, just ignore me as far as that one is concerned.
Biases do come in when you are justifying your decisions.
Yeah.
No, at least for civil servants who are saying yes.
Exactly. So that is definitely an option. The third thing is, do something in public policy, because I think some of what you're doing, Naman, I checked your website, I think is a step in that direction. But there are now institutions, and I could just name one of them because I know them well, and the person who runs it is someone I've been following and tracking and know a little bit, called Takshashila in Bangalore. But there are so many others. I mean, in my years of political activism, I've come across a number of people in institutions who are desperate for help, for someone to come and work with them. And they are not able to pay you a lot, but they can certainly support your lifestyle. So if what motivates you is to do something for India, well, those are 2 3 things. By the way, let me just put one thing straight. Okay, if any of your listeners say, I want to do nothing of this sort, I just want to do an MBA from IIM, get a job in an investment bank, and live a good life. And I said, that's fine, guys. There's nothing absolutely wrong with that. Why? Because as long as you pay your taxes, you are doing your duty. Okay, so be good to people, work hard, and whatever you do, I think, trust me, it will help the country. Now, of course, you go and work for a dictator somewhere in a third world country, that's a different thing, but I doubt any of your listeners will do that. So whatever you do, I don't think there is a set path. Honestly, I do not believe there is a set path. People need to find out for themselves what excites them, what arouses their passion, and follow that.
Very well said. Makes a lot of sense. So, and another question that I think one of the viewers have asked us is that this craze for civil services is primarily restricted to a few countries in South Asia and a few in Africa.
Yes.
Basis your experiences of having lived across the globe,
yes,
what is your experience in terms of what do people aspire to do and how do they view civil services?
Well, it's very low on the career preference scale. Okay, I can tell you that, but there's a good reason for that. And I, not to badmouth all my colleagues and the hundreds of very, very sincere officers we have. By the way, I was speaking to a friend yesterday about civil servants in India, and I said there are at least 20 or 30% because of whom everything you see around, it is this 20 to 30% that make it work. Everything you see around is that. So there is a very core group of people who are extremely hardworking, dedicated, and just brilliant in the civil services. Now, to your question about how is it perceived elsewhere. So I can tell you, well, of the one country that I have very good experience of, which is UK, where I've been living for several years now, and to some extent Japan, I can share you it's nowhere near as high in terms of aspirational levels as it is in India. But then immediately you see why, because of all the perks I mentioned to you, they don't exist. I mean, here you don't need to call someone to get things done. There's on my blog, I had written a post, or actually it was an excerpt from another post. It was not my post. I had actually published an excerpt from a post that in India, to get what politicians do in India, even though they may not be, necessarily the most brilliant and the sincere and the hardworking and et cetera, they manage to get things done, which is why they get elected. Okay, they are what this post I think had called Kaam Ki Sarkar. So when you need some work done, you approach your local politician and it gets done in most parts of India. In abroad, you don't have that issue. If you have a pothole in road in front of you, you don't need to go to a politician. You call the council and they will get have someone come and fix it. Or my point is that people do not have this discretionary authority and powers to get things done. So the glamour of that work role reduces. I mean, the scope of that work reduces dramatically. The scope is not, I will get things fixed. It is, let me think of a good policy that the roads can stay, without potholes for longer. Now, that's not glamorous. So this is not, people do not aspire for civil services in these countries. It's not very high up. Now, having said that, Singapore is an exception. Okay, because Singapore is an exception because 2 reasons. One, they have taken great care and given a lot of thought to how to develop their civil services. They are one of the finest, I think, in the world. The second reason, which people do not think matters much, but I think they overlook it, and that contributes hugely, is they pay them very, very well. And that is important. And if we don't pay our civil service people well, they are going to leave, like your friend and many others, just because, they think there's better opportunity elsewhere. So I think that is an important part as well. At the moment, what the perks substitute for pay, but not everyone wants perks. Some people might want to live in a decent small size house, but want more pay. So I think there are numerous reasons. But yeah, as you know, and you asked me this question, is that it's not as favored outside as it is in India.
And another concerning thing is that in India, we do talk a lot about the demographic dividend. But what we're also seeing that over 1 million candidates, they keep on appearing, preparing, reappearing for the same exam multiple times.
Yeah.
And that too at the prime age of their life, in their 20s, when they're supposed to be the most productive member of India's economy. If they were not revising those books in Old Rajendra Nagar, they would have been launching startups, creating jobs.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on this? And if we were to remove civil services altogether from India, or UPSC, or this entrance exam, basis your experiences, what difference would it make?
Yeah. So let's talk about the civil service removing bit. I would not remove. I would take up. Okay, what we need to do, Raman, to make us a better governed country, let us say, is to gradually and slowly reduce the discretionary powers that vest in the bureaucracy. Okay, the discretion to decide who to give a contract to build a bridge. That should be a public decision. There should be a public hearing. I should know how much is spent on the road in front of my house. Why is that a secret? Why is that information not known? Now you can say you can find out RTI, but that is a painful process. By the way, not all information is RTI. So I think that discretionary authority that vests within these officials should be reduced. So then automatically the attraction will go away, and then the abuse of power happens more when there is obviously more power means more scope for abuse of power, right? So you reduce their discretionary powers as much as possible. There's no need to dismantle. You do need some oversight. So, but of course it's bloated. It's bloated. You can, I think, easily shave off 20-30% without even making a dent in the service levels. Nothing, no impact. Easily 20-30%. That's my guess. You have to be a bit harsh about it. But anyway, the demographic dividend is actually something that I worry about a lot as well. And about, what was it, 2 years back when you saw young guys setting up trains on fire in Bihar. It's actually quite sad to watch that, because as you say, these are people in their prime who could be working, could be gainfully employed, could be doing something else, but are basically almost mindlessly preparing for an examination, which they know the odds are very, very, very high. And so, it is extraordinary to imagine the level of competition for positions, even which are, you would think, are very lowly paid. And so you wonder why does that happen? And that goes to the heart of your demographic dividend question. I think it is widely discussed and debated and mentioned and written, but we need to create more jobs. First thing, we need to make it easy for people to start something. And here again, that discretionary. Now, I'll give you an example. In UK, and you may know about this already, it's possible to set up, register a company, start a business in 24 hours. And by the way, everything online, no need to take permission from anyone. You just inform people. And guess how it is in India? Forget about inform. You have to start with permission. So first of all, find out what license you need. And why is that, the case? Why should it be so hard to just start a business? And of course, what you see is a lot of informal businesses. So people would not register the business. They'll keep doing trading, which is fine. But, you can't grow that way. And why keep it hidden? And why make it something embarrassing? So I think there are numerous things we could do. But the bigger problem is, for these young people, it's easy to say, go and do something of your own, start up something of your own. The thing is, they are not necessarily skilled. That is the other challenge. Okay, and this is where I come to primary education and health. I think our biggest challenges are a lot of youngsters are not adequately skilled and therefore cannot realize their potential. Okay, I'm certain that among the people who were demonstrating against those jobs, there were many who could have cracked the IS civil services, but they never got the chance or the education that you and I had, right? So they are stuck in some small town somewhere, hoping desperately to get some job, even though they have enough brain to be in IIT. But of course, where will you give them the money? Who will train them? Who will coach them? There's nothing. And so how do you do that? And you can do that as a charity, as someone, I can teach 4 people 5. That doesn't scale. You have to fix primary education and primary health, because of course, if a healthy population, if a sickly population is not particularly productive. So they worry me, these challenges, and they are real. And I share your concern that yes, we talk about demographic dividend, but it can easily become a demographic time bomb, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. So Shantanu, so you resigned from the foreign services. Yeah. And so you started Satyameva Jayate thereafter, or did you then upskill yourself at London Business School? how did the trajectory go from there on?
Yeah, no. So there are two distinct things here. So I resigned so I resigned and did an MBA from London Business School, and then basically have been in the private space since then.
So you already had an offer from LBS before resigning from services, or this was after the services? You applied and
No. I had an offer. So the offer I applied. And of course, I had to take permission, right? I mean, you had to take permission from. So I had to take permission from the ministry to apply. So in fact, I remember one of my joint secretaries asked me, "Why do you want to do an MBA?" Probably suspected that I may not last. But
even resignation takes a lot of time.
It does. So what your listeners may not know, and I don't know if you know this, but in case of IFS, and the reason it was much simpler. It takes years, by the way. I don't know if you know this, but your listeners may know that it takes years, really a long time, and that is very, very silly. I mean, why it should take so long? But for the Foreign Service, what you might not know is the cadre control is within the ministry. So the ministry controls the cadre of Foreign Service officers on its own without reference to DOPT, which is the Department of Personnel Training. And so the decisions about cadres, about resignation, joining, etc., posting, etc., are all done internally and can happen quite quickly. In spite of that, it might took a while, but because it's such a small service, it wasn't that much of a pain. But yeah, it is a process. It can take years, as I said, and it is just extraordinary why it should take so long. But it is what it is. So I did an MBA, and then I was very fortunate to get I did a year of strategy consulting, and then joined a venture capital firm. And I've been in investments since then, early stage investments since then. The Satyameva Jayate blog, which is the name of the blog, I would hesitate to call it a movement. That's too grand a word. It's just a blog and a place for my thoughts. But that was, I mentioned to you earlier on that I always love to write. I realized also, I think somewhere along the line, that I will never be able to write very well. So for me, the only option was to, kind of a journal kind of writing, not a novel. I'm not good enough to write a novel. So writing I always enjoyed, and just writing, sharing my thoughts. And this is not, we are not talking of novels. We just sort of, as I said, blog post or something. And I started writing about 2003-04, and obviously about India. And my heart is still and remains in India. So it was also, of course, even then. So I started that blog, and one thing led to another. And I think around 2008, so this was about 8 years after resigning, 9 years after resigning, I realized that the way to change the system is actually to get through political activism, basically through politics. And we talked about this large-scale change, which you asked me initially. And that was the driving factor behind the next 6-7 years. So between 2008 to 2014-15, I spent more than half my time on these political activities, lots of stuff. Can have a conversation separately on that, but that was the result of this realization that I can keep writing, but to bring about change, you need to go and talk to the people and actually try and see if you can change things, change the structure of the system, which essentially, I think at the heart of it is campaign finance reform, which is a big. I think that's at the root of our corruption in politics in India in particular, but also generally. But political campaign financing is at the root of it, and that in India is broken completely. It's a joke. I mean, you can spend 40 lakhs, and we all know no one gets elected on 40 lakhs. No chance. So there you are.
So I think one person just asked a very interesting question. And but yes, I will have to digress a bit from this current discussion. The question is, Naman, please ask Shantanu if Shantanu were in his 20s in the year 2023 and he just graduated from his undergrad degree, will he still opt for civil services, or will he redefine his life basis whatever experiences he has?
I think if your listener had heard the earlier part of the story, you probably know the answer. I will 100% decide not. As explained, I think the decision to end up in civil services, in my case, was series of events which you cannot plan. okay, you cannot plan to be in engineering and not like it and then try for M and then be not admitted for some reason and then try for IS and get lucky to get selected and so on. So that you end up actually not quite planning that way. And so to your question, so your listeners would be very interested to know. So the next question, obviously, natural thing follow would be, so what would you do? I'm guessing that's the next question. And even if it is not asked, I'm going to answer it. Okay, so bear with me. I will tell you what I did actually. So look, I told you before, I was a bit crazy in my youth, and I think I still am. So one of the things which, again, I have not mentioned is I had decided when I appeared for civil services that I will only attempt it one time, just once, which anyone will tell you is a very stupid idea, by the way. Okay, but that was me then. Today, I don't know what advice I would give myself, but I said I'll only attempt it once. Now, the process is that you appear for the prelims, then and then you wait, and then you appear for the mains, and then you wait, and then if you're lucky, you get an interview call. And now, while I was doing my prelims and I'm preparing for IS, I was working with Steel Authority of India in Rourkela. So I gave my prelims. Of course, people around me knew I was appearing for IS, and they said, okay, so what are you going to do afterwards, and what are you preparing, etc., etc. I won't tell you which subjects I took because it is so unbelievable that you think I'll making it up. But forget that aside. So I gave the prelims, results came, got lucky, got into mains. I sat for the mains. And the day the mains ended, I went up to my boss and said, I'm resigning. And this is, by the way, I was in the management trainee program at SAIL, okay? So for your listeners, the management trainee program at SAIL is essentially a government job, which guarantees you a good job for your lifetime with a very nice pension. So it's a very good job. If you get it, go for it. Okay, so don't follow my path. I went up to my boss and said, I want to quit. And he said, why do you want to quit? He knew I was preparing for civil. He said, your results are not yet out. You might not get in. I said, yeah, I know I might not get in. He said, why do you want to quit? You're still under training. You'll get a job here. I said, I don't want to work here. Said, yeah. Why would you not want to work? And I said something which was, really stupid. I said, I'm not enjoying this. I know I just wanted to prepare for the exam. So I thought this might be a good way to at least, not just sit at home, also earn a bit. But I want to do something else now, and steel is not for me. Steel Authority is not for me. And so I went, and the short answer is I ended up doing mushroom farming, believe it or not, in Indore, which was a disaster, of course, knowing the climate and so on. But to the listener who asked that question, I would have probably continued doing crazy things until I would have got lucky, I think, which is what I did in the end. So there you are.
Interesting. So Tanish had asked this question. About your quick point about that appearing for civil services just once is a stupid idea. I think I will disagree with it, because what happens is if you appear for this exam once, you fail the exam, your 1 year is gone.
Yeah.
And then if you reappear for this exam again, then you have multiple years gone.
Yeah.
And thereafter sunk cost kicks in. And it's very difficult to then move on to do anything else in life. Yeah.
No, I think you and me, Naman, are on the same wavelength in this case. I think, I think the only reason I said it's not a good idea because, I genuinely, sincerely advise people that this is the kind of exam, and even the CAT to some extent is not something that, you should kind of peg your future life on. Okay, it's not something that you evaluate yourself and your entire life just based on one exam. So it's very fickle, and the things, strange things happen because of the complexity of the nature of the examination and the subjects and the process. In spite of your best effort, something might go off. The evaluator that day might not be feeling great, and so you are downgraded. Then there's this weightage system to make a balance between the subjects and all sorts of crazy things. So, which is, and a lot of people, and I don't know about you, and certainly in my case, they actually do something or the other while they're preparing. So perhaps, they're not able to give their best. And so that's why I say maybe, okay. But of course, there are people who give it 4 times, which I don't think is a good idea. Anyway, who am I to say? So there you are.
And so Shantanu, so you went for your MBA, you work with strategy consulting, and then you've been working in VC space. During this journey, since you spoke about your love for India and blog that you write, did you ever flirt with the idea of participating in electoral politics in India?
Oh, yes, I did. So it's also on my blog, I briefly joined Aam Aadmi Party, which, what a surprise, right? So, and then what a surprise that I left soon after. So yeah, so that's the short answer to your question. Uh, Having said all that, I
Was
do
Arvind
believe that
Kejriwal from your batch in
no,
the civil services?
no. He's I think he's 95, so 4 years younger. But yeah, there are people I know who know him, and yeah, it's so. That aside, um, I think it was at that time the thing that I should have done that, because otherwise I would not have realized. So there are always things, sometimes you have to do it in life to really understand or learn from them. And I think this was one thing. I think I learned a lot from that experience, but I continue to believe that that is the only way to bring about sustained change. However, what I'm also come to believe is that it is linked, because it's such a complex thing to, when you start analyzing the root of problems. It's such a complex thing of electoral politics, campaign finance, and the system of democracy that we have, that to bring about any change, first of all, we are talking of decades of work by a lot of people. And so I kind of changed my stance a little bit on that and say anything that you do that makes people aware of the problems we face and the solutions to them, I think is good. It could be working with a think tank, it could be working with a public policy institute, it could be working in public policy, it could be doing social work, social enterprises, even politics, if you can bear it. In my case, I could not, because the way I phrase it is, being in active politics requires a certain kind of moral flexibility, is what I call it. Okay, let's not use any other words, but let's say moral flexibility, which I do not have. But if you think you have it, that's okay. I'm not judging here people by their values or what they see is right or wrong. That's for each of us to decide what's good for you, what's not good for you, or what's right in your view. But that is the only way to bring about change. And in spite of my ideological differences with Aam Aadmi Party, I'm actually pleased, because they broke the paradigm of established, entrenched political power in India. And in that sense, that's the huge kind of reason for hope for the future, that such parties can come and actually establish themselves. And we are not talking about all the problems that later on have cropped up and all the controversies, etc. But look, that gives you hope. Then the fact that the 30-40 year almost a stranglehold of Congress was also kind of that did not continue in the beyond 2010 or beyond 2014, to be specific. That also is heartening, because I think we can have faith that our people, in spite of being poor, illiterate, etc., are fundamentally, within quotes, wise when it comes to choices, and will not let anyone kind of dominate them for too long a time. I think at some point they will rebel, and that gives you hope, because when people become passive, I think that's when a society goes down, basically. But I don't think we as Indians, everyone, in fact, who is listening in on this show, clearly is not passive, and so I have hope, because they are at least thinking about what to do, and that's good enough as a first step. Just keep thinking, guys. I say, just think whatever you can, even if you can't do anything, just please think about what we can do and what are the challenges we are facing. That's good enough.
So, Shantanu, you've entirely dropped the idea now to participate in electoral politics. Do you still?
In electoral, yes, probably definitely for now, 100%. Who knows what tomorrow brings? But yeah, that's not my cup of tea. As I said, because of what it requires you, to change. Certainly, in my case, would have required me to change my very deeply held beliefs, which was not comfortable. So there we are.
Wow. So one of the subscriber also asked an interesting question, and the question is: so during your time in the IFS, even though you perhaps did not like the time, what skill sets did you learn that you wouldn't have learned anywhere else in the world, or in any other job in the world? So what skill sets did you learn, and how you're using those skill sets now?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I was there only for a short while, relatively speaking. I mean, 7 years is not very short, but equally, it's not a very long time. And don't forget that it's a very specialized profession. Okay, being a diplomat, it's a very, very specialized. It's like being trained as a medical doctor. Even if you or me want to be a doctor, we can't just pick up a stethoscope and be a doctor. You had to train for it. And so diplomacy is like that. It's a profession. It's a profession. It's a specialist profession. So there was a lot of things. The things that I learned is just in general about how the world functions in terms of international relations and so on. So that was, of course, a lot of learning there, which I think generally for anyone, and even for your listeners, we are living in a world that is very mobile. Okay, I think I'm pretty sure almost all your listeners, or most of them, will end up being in some other country at some point in their lives, or maybe already are. And so I think international affairs is not something that you can say, I don't care about it. I live in Indore or Bhopal or wherever, and it's not my concern what happens between US and China or Japan and US, for example. So that was definitely the language, although I don't use it in my work at all, and it's more a bragging point than reality. I can't speak Japanese really anymore.
All I know is
not properly. Not properly at all. But I think a lot of other things. There's one thing which I think is definitely very, very, which I have never forget, and I think I always quote it to youngsters, is to get to the bottom of the news. Never go by the headline, and try and understand precisely what words mean. I think the power of words, that was one learning, definitely. I think I become much more precise and specific with words I use, and begun to understand how headlines can be very, very misleading if you don't read the full story. And so that's definitely one thing I picked up in the phone. So we were required to read and respond, and you couldn't just say, oh, that was the headline, so I just wrote that. Sorry, you can't do that. Actually read what was written, what was said. So those were the few things. But other than that, look, it was a complete career transformation change for me from that kind of a role to venture capital to, in fact, even to an MBA. So in that sense, there's not much that is I can carry over or have carried over.
Wow. And another question, which I think you will be the perfect person to answer is, because, and that's my assumption, that you definitely come from a very humble background. You grew up in Madhya Pradesh.
Yeah.
So many of the viewers, they are also from the same background.
Yeah.
And foreign services is something very foreign to them as an idea.
Yeah.
Many of them have to take care of their parents. So if they were to perhaps get into the foreign services,
yes,
would you advise them? I mean, in terms of, will they be able to take care of the family as a single son, lone daughter?
So this is I should share this with you. You asked me, Naman, why did I choose foreign service as the first choice, and I gave you the reasons. I then realized, I did not know this, by the way, just so you would be shocked at how naive I was. I had no idea, for example, what DA meant, as an example. Okay, I told you I was very removed from government and all that, so I had no idea what DA meant. But coming to the foreign service, what I did not know when I opted for that is your entire salary that you get abroad when you are posted abroad is tax-free. I did not know that. And then once I realized that, and I actually started promoting foreign services to everyone, saying, this is okay, by the way, this is 90s. Okay, so I used to tell them, look, if you want to be in India and earn money, lot of money, become a millionaire in a right way, within quotes, without violating any laws, foreign service is the one way you do it. You can drive a Mercedes without anyone saying, where did you get that Mercedes? You must have done somewhere away. So this is the job that will get you that, because your entire salary is tax-free. So it pays very well. That's a short answer. Okay, it pays very well. None of your listeners should have any concerns. It is, in fact, pays because of course, it's tax-free, and because it's lifestyle abroad, you get paid far more than what your colleagues in the IAS, IPS will get paid. Of course, they have those big bungalows, which you don't have, but that's another thing. So, I would encourage definitely any one of your listeners, if that's a service they want to opt for, go for it. Absolutely.
All right. So let's talk about your London Business School. So how old were you when you were acclimatizing to the MBA ecosystem, and how was the experience?
Well, you are embarrassing me now. So I was really very old. Okay, that's again something not I would advise unless you are absolutely desperate like me. When I joined, I was 32, so that's not a young age.
That's a decent age, I think.
It's a decent age, except we had a baby. We have a daughter now. She was young at the time, and of course I was married, and I was not. I had not studied anything for like 8 years or so, right? Who studies after civil services? So But not just that. I think it was a complete change of direction. I think that was the hard part. I mean, I had not seen a profit and loss sheet in my life before doing an MBA. Why would I, right? It's like expecting a doctor to understand a balance sheet. There's no need. Or for you or me to understand the ECG graph. We don't need to. And then to have to be faced with that and in a very competitive environment. And LBS is one of the finest B schools, as you know. So it was quite intense. But I was lucky, and so yeah. So, but I mean, if a lot of people ask me what's the right age to do an MBA, I don't think there's a right age for anything. But I would say 32 is probably pushing it. You could do it. There's nothing to stop people from doing even at 50. But yeah, there you go.
Okay, and then after the MBA, again, my assumption is that you joined a management consulting firm.
Yes.
And basis my experience, I think they would hire at an associate level or
yes.
beginning of the career level.
Yes.
Was that the case with you as well? And if yes, did you like that, given the fact that you were already a mid-ranking officer in the foreign services?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So they did that, of course. And what I had was a negotiation with them that after 1 year, because of course they knew my background, they had seen my CV, etc., and they knew I'd worked abroad, worked for a number of years. So we had agreed that within a year, I'll be moved. And then, of course, I quit within a year. I joined a venture capital firm where it was different then. But yes, that was fine. And I think, no, look, I think that is one of the things that differentiates the foreign service from other services, civil services. So think about someone who is in IPS, okay? Mm-hmm. So from the time they wake up in the morning, they're saluted by people. There is someone waiting for them. I mean, literally from morning till night. While in the foreign service now, there's nothing like that. So as it is, you're not very much used to the trappings of power, okay? Which, for example, IS or IPS would be, or any, government officer, senior level would be used to that. But in IFS, you're in an embassy, there are very few people. Usually there's the India staff is about a dozen people, maybe a little bit more. And then there's a local staff. And with the local staff and all that, you don't expect them, and you can't expect them to say yes or to you. And why would they? Why should they? So I think that whole hierarchy thing and, kind of sir, madam mentality in foreign services is a lot less compared to IS, etc. So the change was not that hard. I think this is probably a right question for someone. I think probably the hardest for someone. So uniformed services, I believe, have these, very, very hard, find it very challenging even after retirement, because suddenly no one is saluting you, right? Up until yesterday, you were wearing a uniform and people would stand up and salute, and now you're just a civilian no one recognizes, and same for people from army, for example. So no, I think there was a bit of adjustment, but I was prepared for that. It was a 2-year MBA, so you kind of think about it. It doesn't come as a big surprise in the sense.
Interesting. And so there's a question. So let's assume that. So what would be your advice to an officer in the IFS right now, in his or her 30s, who is now contemplating of quitting civil services and perhaps doing a master's degree in international affairs from Howard Kennedy School?
Yeah, John F. Kennedy. Do it.
Yeah.
Do it. It's simple advice.
Why?
Look, no. Well, so I have to step back a little bit here. You may know, and if your listeners don't know, they should know this, that you don't have to resign, okay, for you to do your degree or do something else. You don't have to. You only have to resign when you take up a job. So you can continue in the foreign service, and I think depending on what you negotiate, etc., and what degree you are pursuing, you can also, I believe, you can maintain your seniority too, if you pursue certain courses. But first of all, get rid of the notion that if you want to study something, you have to quit. No, you don't. After studying that, if you want to stay, you can still stay, come back, and I don't know what happens to your seniority, but the thing is, you don't have to quit. That is the first thing. The second thing, I think, as far as, look, you asked me right at the beginning, Naman, what would be my advice for people listening? And I think one of the things I always say to youngsters is, remain curious throughout your life. You should be curious, and curious about generally everything. And learning is a great part of, it's a big part of that. It's taking on a degree, learning something different, formally learning something different. Okay, I mean, every day you learn something different, but as in taking a proper course, I would say I would encourage people to do it. I think we as a country would be better if we actually encouraged, in fact, our servants to go and do degrees and then come back and join. And of course, while talking of this, we are talking also of lateral entry into civil service, which I think is an excellent idea, very, very good idea. And so to your listener, I would say just do it. And then don't worry about quitting. You don't have to quit. After the completion, you can decide whether you want to stay or you want to not come back.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, about lateral entry, what are your thoughts? Why do you think it's a phenomenal idea?
It's a phenomenal idea. Look, because for the simple reason, once you're in the service, and I can say because I was there, you have very little time for really expanding your knowledge, for keeping abreast of what's happening, and for looking at other things, getting other ideas. Okay, in any job, if that job is the only thing that's taking all your time, you're not going to get sub-efficient at it over time. Okay, because you'll stop learning new ideas, you'll stop picking up new things, and you'll not be as creative. So I think what lateral entry does is force people within that group to actually interact with someone who is from outside. And, that kind of interaction, I think, is always it may not always be very harmonious. Okay. There might be conflict and so on. But, this is the classic concept of brainstorming is people come together and discuss freely. And I think that's very good. And I think we need that. We need that injection of new ideas, new energy, new thoughts, ways of doing things. I think we need that in the civil service because our processes, etc., are so ancient. They need to be exposed to what the rest of the world is doing, what people in large private successful companies are doing, and some of those work practices are cutting edge. So why should not they be adopted by someone in the collector's office, for example? So things like that. I strongly encourage that. I favor that, and I'm a big supporter of lateral entry. Although I did it the other way around, right? I actually moved out of lateral, but that's a different thing.
But there is lateral entry in a few ministries. But not, I think, in the MEA.
Not yet in the MEA, as far as I know. You're right. I think
that is possible.
Well, why not? Why not? I mean, why would you assume that only people in the foreign service know about international affairs? Of course not. In fact, there are people outside of foreign service who write very, very well on foreign policy and international affairs. I mean, your listeners would know about them. They are not MEA officials. In fact, I can argue that those people probably know more because they are not bothered with dealing with files and postings and transfers, right? They can just focus on international affairs. So they're actually, in many ways, kind of experts. I mean, there are experts, of course, right, outside, and they're not necessarily part of the service. So having those people inside for a period of time, I'm not saying give them permanent job and give them this rank, but even if someone can come in for 2, 3, 4 years, I'm sure that will help.
How does it work in, let's say, Singapore or Japan or UK? In terms of lateral entry?
So UK and in a lot of countries, what they do is positions are always open. There is no kind of equivalent of ICS in UK. In Japan, there is actually. In Japan, there is. But it has changed now. So I think they do encourage people to come in from private corporations. In UK, it is pretty much open. People come in and leave all the time. I mean, they come and go back and come and go back. So that there is a category of IAS equivalent in UK called fast track civil servants, but that's very, very small, really small. And everyone else is, imagine, for example, everyone we recruit via the public the PCS exam, the provincial civil services exam. If everyone was basically opened up to private sector, that is what happens in UK. So those level positions are all open all the time, and you can leave, you can rejoin. It's entirely up to you.
One viewer has asked a very interesting question that was Tokyo your first visit to an international place?
Yes.
And basis your experiences in Japan, what are certain things that India can and perhaps should learn from Japan?
So definitely it was the first experience for me of a foreign country, and it was a complete shock because it remains very different. It was, of course, at that time also very, very different. What can we learn? Look, I think if you have ever spoken to people if you have ever spoken to someone who has been abroad, they come back and say, oh, we should do this, we should do this. India is down the dumps, and look at Singapore, look at US, look at UK, look at this. Yes, I say yes, that's true. And, I was guilty of saying such things too. And as you dig deeper, you realize that a lot of things have very deep social, cultural roots, which are difficult to entangle and just, assume that you can do the same thing here. I'll give you a very simple example. There's a mindset and attitude thing, which is, I think, related to our diversity and the fact that Japan is a very homogeneous country. We are, in contrast, a very diverse country. We are a very diverse, loud, argumentative, vibrant country. Japan is very quiet, homogeneous, kind of stay under the radar sort of place. If you say to people there, walk in a line, if you just go into a crowd and say, everyone stand to the left, you will get no protest. People will just stand, regardless of who you are. Okay, they won't expect you to be a figure of authority. And India, if you go in a crowd and stand to the left, where first of all, no one's going to bother even listening to you. But if they do, they'll ask you why. Why should we stand to the left? And you see, that culture, you cannot transplant that attitude to India. So I think just assuming that we can bring those things here, that's not realistic. What we can learn are smaller things. And those, I think, we can learn from within our family, our community, our circles, social circles. And so that one, for example, could be just a respect for people's time. I think as Indians, we are getting better, but we were very bad at it. And we're talking about civil service, the worst at it. I mean, how many times have any of your listeners ever experienced a senior officer keeping their time? Not once. And by the way, we are permanently understaffed for critical matters in India. Unfortunately, even though we have a very large group of civil servants, there's only a few that you can trust for critical tasks, and they are constantly overworked, as you know. So there's this time thing, I think, which we can learn. The cleanliness. And that's something, cleanliness has nothing to do with homogeneity or diversity, right? It's just being clean, trying to be, and even small things make a difference. So I think in your personal behavior, where you could, and that's something that certainly, when you go abroad, I think I encourage actually everyone to travel, because it opens up your eyes to what can be done. Yeah. And I think first, for me, traveling abroad opened my eyes to how we can actually make our surroundings better, our city, our society, our country better, because you now have an example of a better place. And until you actually see that, you never realize, wow, you could actually do it this way. So I would encourage everyone. And as I said, it was a big shock, but it was a great learning. And travel is always a great way to learn and to do things differently, and encourage all of you to really do that. I know, Naman, you are an avid traveler, so you don't need that advice.
I absolutely love your point about traveling abroad, and because it definitely opens you for so many experiences, teaches you empathy and so many things. In fact, even at Global Governance Initiative, we are thinking of starting these internships program.
Oh, yes.
In collaboration with universities and organizations abroad, so that Indians can then travel abroad and perhaps work there, live in that culture.
Right. No, that's a very good idea. Go for it.
But of course, there will be so many issues about the visa and the permits.
Now things are getting easier. You saw the results from the discussions Bodhiji had with President Biden. So hopefully, fingers crossed.
US is just one country.
I know. There are many other. UK is getting easier too. Australia as well. So we'll see.
Anyway. Fantastic. And of all the places in the world, why did you choose UK as the base? Are you have you shifted your citizenship to UK, or have you what's the
So my citizenship, so I remain a proud Indian, and for that I have to stand in queues for my visa application, which I'm happy to, and sometimes it's very annoying, but no. So I retained my citizenship. I still hold an Indian passport. I continue to hold it, and it's not I chose UK. I think I was speaking to someone else yesterday who was settled in Singapore and come to visit because he used to be in UK before, and said, how did you end up in Singapore? And he said, well, the same way you ended up in UK. You kind of end up in one place and you like it and you stay, and then you put down roots. So in my case, I haven't put down roots, as in the citizenship, of course, is the biggest root of all, but I still hold that Indian citizenship. But more importantly, we have no family here. So my entire family, my sister, my parents, and everyone else, literally all, even from my wife's side, my in-laws side, we have no family here. So I think UK is, I hesitate to call it home. I mean, it is home in the sense that I live here, but it doesn't feel home. India is always home, and I visit very frequently. I mean, between the years I was telling you, in 1 year I almost ended up being a resident taxpayer citizen. So that was the time I was spending in India, beyond the 180 days, whatever it is. But yeah, so I stay in very close touch, and at some point, I'm going to be back for sure.
Possibly for a political role.
We'll see.
But before that, I also want to understand about you. What is this thing with passport and how powerful such passports are? Especially for many youngsters from India, when they travel abroad, they realize, unfortunately, the weakness of Indian passport versus the other passports. Yeah. So what is this thing, and what can government do, and what is government doing to perhaps change this? Because many times, many of the youngsters, they give up on citizenships. This is the powerlessness of Indian passport. You can't travel to certain countries, or it takes a lot of time, a lot of hassle, so on and so forth. Yeah.
So I think, well, first of all, the weaknesses depends on what you mean by weakness. So by the way, the travel, I think you can, as far as I know, I don't think there's any country you cannot travel. You cannot travel on the same passport to certain group of countries, which you can find out if you do Google. But you can travel, I think, on Indian passport to anywhere. Now, what makes it weak or, kind of challenging is almost everywhere. I say almost because actually there are apparently 30 countries where you don't need a visa, or you get a visa on arrival for an Indian passport. So again, that is pretty painless because you just land there and you'll get a visa. And we have visa free, of course, with, for example, Nepal, we have, and Bhutan as well. But we don't have for most other countries. I mean, Europe, all of the Western world, Australia, New Zealand, we'll need a visa there. Everyone needs it with an Indian passport. So that, I think, is what people call as weakness within quotes, because a powerful passport is one which lets you enter without a visa in all these countries, so which is a UK passport, US passport, etc. So look, I know youngsters do that, and I don't make a value judgment on it. I would not say that's good or bad. If people make their personal choices, it's a very personal thing for me to give up my citizenship, so I just feel strongly about it. But equally, if someone is thinking of it, I would not say, oh, no, you can't do that, you're a traitor. No, I think, though, that we probably need to get out of that mentality, I think, a little bit. What could government do is actually one thing that I think they would do at some point. They haven't done yet. Well, first of all, actually, there are security considerations behind this. When you have visa-free travel, you basically have no checks at the borders. And as a country, we still are in a very serious geopolitical situation. Okay, so we cannot afford visa-free travel at the moment for most countries. And so we will need, and of course, the minute you say we need a visa, the other country also says, well, you will also need a visa from us. So for example, UK citizens, there are only few countries where UK and American citizens need a visa. India is one of them, China is another, Russia is another. Okay, why? Because China, Russia, India, we all ask also for them that we ask for a visa from them. And that's why they want our citizens also to apply for a visa. They won't give us visa free because we don't, it's a reciprocal thing. Right? So visa arrangements are typically reciprocal, but we can't reciprocate because of our situation. And so that's how we are. Now, what can be done about this is in theory is easy, but in practice is not easy at all. Because again, of the situation that we are in, the internal security situation, is you can actually have dual citizenship, which a lot of countries have. And so people can have their, UK and US, and they can also have Indian. Now, in India's case, that's not so easy because of internal security issues. And so, you can have people with dubious nationalities and managing to get an Indian passport. So I think at some point it will happen. I think because the Indian diaspora now is so large that it doesn't make sense to pretend that, they are not Indians. I mean, they are very much Indians. Even after giving a passport, they are not going to change their appearance or the way they live, etc. So at the same time, look, Raman, at the same time, other than the fact that you cannot vote, there is not a single thing that a PIO or OCI cannot do. So I, therefore, would also challenge that when people say, oh, once you're an NRI, you are switched off. I say, no, you can actually do pretty much whatever you want to do. You can travel anytime, you can buy property, you can't buy agricultural land, of course, and you can't vote. But voting, I think, is right. Only a citizen. By the way, I can't vote because I'm here. So right now, I think that's the next step they are trying to do, is to allow non-residents to vote from where they are living abroad. At the moment. So that's the next step, I think. But so no, I have a different view on this. I think if young people are thinking about it, fine. It's entirely their and their family's choice.
Okay, fair enough. One question that someone has asked is many people who join the foreign services, they tend to say that they've preferred foreign services because of the freedom that comes along with it. How true is that? Because as per my limited understanding, there are a lot of restrictions. But what are your thoughts on this?
So I'm not sure what they mean by freedom, because freedom from political interference to some extent, yes. But that is simply because there are very few things that you can do for a politician sitting in an embassy. Why does an IS get a call from a minister mostly? Not because there is some policy work to be discussed, right? So people in IS and IPS, they get calls from politicians because there is something that they can help with. It's nothing to do with policy or some program. Now, in case of foreign service or IFS officers, if I'm sitting in an embassy in Tokyo, what help can I give a politician sitting in Indore, for example? Practically nothing. So in that sense, you have freedom to work, to focus on your work, do what you're supposed to do. And that was, as I explained at the beginning, was one of the main reasons why I said this is the service I would like to join, because here I can, at least focus on work rather than getting into arguments with others and saying no and getting into trouble. So there is a freedom, but there isn't freedom in the sense you can do pretty much what you want, because don't forget, you are representing your country. So in many ways, your expectations are very high about certain behaviors, about the way you, for example, dress, the way you behave in public, interactions with public, with the local population, because you are representing the country and their image of India. Okay, so an Indian who throws litter is basically then immediately is going to be seen as Indians are, they throw litter everywhere. And that's happened, unfortunately. So I think as a diplomat, yes, you have in fact, as Naman says, I think a somewhat restricted freedom. Now, if as a tourist you can go and throw litter, people still realize that you're Indian. So the image still takes a hammering, but at least, you are not representing your country. So that's never a good thing, by the way. But so yes, in that sense, I think the freedom is constrained because there are certain behavioral norms that are expected of you. If you are, for example, I am living in London, I can walk in the park with my shorts and with just a t-shirt, I don't care. But if I was in the embassy here, I probably would not do that unless it was in my leisure time, right? In my role these days, I take calls walking in the park. Now, as a diplomat, I can't do that wearing t-shirts and a short. So I think there are some restrictions.
Fantastic. So, Shantanu, what is your current role? What do you do?
So I spend my time these days mostly advising startups and venture funds. And so I have a couple of advisory roles, which I do. I also have a couple of angel investments in India. And then at some point, Naman mentioned about my blog, which has been dormant for 8 years now. And at some point, I'm going to revive it. So I've already started thinking about it very seriously. So once I do that, that's going to be
We'll share the link of that blog as well.
Yes, of course. I can share. I'll share a bunch of links actually in the chat window. So there's a blog, and from those of you who are curious about my political journey, there are some videos from those times. They're all very dated. They're like several years old, but yeah, they'll give you some idea. So I'm sharing it, Naman, now in a minute.
With WhatsApp, that's much better because it stays. Here with Zoom, those links will expire.
Okay, fine. I'll send it to you on WhatsApp. No problem.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Shantanu, for taking out the time. Means a lot.
No,
and I hope you have a wonderful day ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for very engaging questions. I hope your listeners enjoyed it. And, for all of you, I think keep thinking of India, guys. That's my one piece of advice. Just do whatever you're doing, be good at it, and keep thinking of India. And that's good. You'll be good. Okay. All the best.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yes.
You too.
Yes.
Take care.
Bye. Thanks. Bye.